James Carter walked into the airport with quiet confidence. He was wearing a sharp black suit, polished shoes, and carried a leather briefcase in one hand. He looked like a man on a mission, and he was. James was a successful businessman. He had built his own company from the ground up. And today, he had a very important flight to catch. His flight was headed to New York, where he was going to close a business deal worth millions of dollars. He had booked a first-class seat. Everything was planned. Everything was on time. But sometimes, life doesn't follow your plan. As James reached the boarding gate, he handed his ticket to the staff. The lady at the counter looked at him, then at his ticket. Then she frowned. "Wait here," she said, her voice cold and sharp. James was confused. "Is there a problem?" he asked politely. She didn't answer. Instead, she whispered something to a nearby security guard. The guard looked at James, then walked over. "Sir, we need you to step aside," the guard said. Passengers behind James began to stare. Some whispered. Some looked away. James stayed calm. He had done nothing wrong. "I have a valid ticket. First class," James explained, showing it again. The staff member gave him a fake smile. "Yes, but we need to recheck something. Please wait over there." James stepped aside, still holding his ticket. 10 minutes passed, then 15. People continued boarding. Some of them glanced at James. No one said a word to him. Then the lady returned. "I'm sorry, sir. You won't be able to board this flight." James blinked. "Why?" "It's company policy," she said, not making eye contact. "What policy?" She didn't answer. The security guard stepped in again. "Sir, if you continue asking questions, we'll have to escort you out." James felt something burn inside him. Not anger, but deep pain. Shame. He looked around. Nobody stood up for him, not even the other passengers in line. He took a deep breath. "I will not cause a scene," he said quietly. And he walked away. As he walked through the airport, he thought of everything he had gone through to reach this point in life. Born in a poor neighborhood, raised by a single mother, studied hard, worked harder, faced racism many times before, but never like this. Today, he had money, power, success, but none of that mattered in this moment. They didn't see a CEO. They saw a black man, and that was enough for them to judge. He sat alone in the airport lounge, staring out the window as planes flew in and out. His phone buzzed with messages. Business partners waiting, meetings scheduled, but he stayed silent. One call from his lawyer could have made this public. One angry tweet could have destroyed the airline's reputation. But James didn't act out of anger. He acted with something more powerful: purpose. He picked up his phone and made a quiet call. "Cancel all meetings today," he said, "and get my boardroom ready. I have a new plan." The assistant on the other end was surprised. "Is everything okay, sir?" James looked back toward the gate where it all happened. His voice was steady. "No, but it will be." James Carter returned home late that night. He didn't speak much during the car ride. His driver looked at him through the mirror once or twice, but didn't ask questions. James sat quietly, looking out of the window. The city lights passed by like fading stars. On the outside, he looked calm. But on the inside, something powerful was rising, like a storm preparing to strike. He reached his mansion in the hills. A tall gate opened slowly. The security guard greeted him, but James simply nodded and walked inside. His assistant, Mark, was already waiting in the living room. "Sir, the New York clients are asking if you missed the flight." James placed his briefcase on the table and removed his watch slowly. "Tell them I'll call them tomorrow," he replied. Mark paused. "Do you want me to contact the media? We can file a complaint. This is discrimination, plain and clear." James looked at Mark, his face steady. "No," he said. "No public noise. Not yet." Mark was surprised. "But, sir, what they did to you was wrong." James walked to the window and stood still for a moment. His voice was low but clear. "I've faced worse. When I was 12, a store owner accused me of stealing a candy bar. I had no money, but I was innocent. My mother begged that man not to call the police. I never forgot that day." Mark remained silent. James continued. I didn't fight back then. I couldn't. But today, I can. And I will. Not with noise. With action. He turned away from the window and said, cancel tomorrow's schedule. I want the boardroom ready at 10 a.m. Mark nodded. Yes, sir. The next morning, James entered his office. The boardroom was quiet, but the air felt heavy with purpose. 12 of his top executives were seated around the table. Men and women who had worked with him for years. They had seen his rise. They had followed his lead through every challenge. James stood at the head of the table. We're making a new investment, he said. Everyone looked up. In what sector? One of them asked. James paused. Airlines. A moment of silence. Airlines? Mark echoed. Sir, are we starting our own airline? James shook his head. No, we're buying one. Which one? He looked each of them in the eyes, then said the name of the company that had stopped him from boarding. The room went still. But they're a national brand, one executive said. They have over 50 planes. They also have debt, a lot of it, James said. Their stock has been falling for months. I've already spoken to 2 of their board members. They're open to talks. They don't know who's behind it yet. Another executive leaned forward. Are we doing this because of what happened at the airport? James took a deep breath. I'm doing this, he said, because no one should ever feel the way I felt yesterday. Not because of skin color. Not because of background. None ever again. He continued, this is not revenge. This is a message. We will buy the airline, fix the culture, and turn it into something better. Something respectful. Something human. The room filled with a quiet kind of energy. Respect. Focus. Purpose. Mark leaned back in his chair. If anyone can do it, it's you. Over the next few weeks, James worked in silence. He didn't post anything online. He didn't mention the incident. But behind closed doors, he and his team worked like a silent army. They met with lawyers, investors, bankers. They started buying small chunks of stock through different companies, quietly, carefully, legally. Within a month, they owned nearly 30% of the airline. Then James flew to meet the board of directors in person, on a private jet, not theirs. The boardroom was filled with older men, some confused, some curious. One of them asked, Mr. Carter, why are you interested in us? James smiled politely. Because I see potential, and because I believe your company needs new leadership, fresh vision. They didn't know the truth. Not yet. But they would. That night, James returned home and stood on his balcony. The city lights sparkled below, just like they had on the night of the humiliation. Only now, something had changed. He was no longer just a passenger who was denied entry. He was a man preparing to walk through the same doors, not as a customer, but as the owner. He picked up his phone and called Mark. We're almost there, he said. Mark's voice came through, excited. What's the next step? James looked up at the stars. Now, he said, we show them who I really am. The world didn't know what was happening. People went about their daily lives. The airline kept running flights. Staff smiled at passengers. Ads promised comfort and care. But behind closed doors, something big was happening. Something that would soon shake the entire company. And it all started with the man they tried to humiliate. James Carter. He wasn't angry anymore. He was focused. And that was more dangerous than anger. In a quiet office building in downtown Chicago, James met with his private investment team. No media, no noise, just planning, numbers, strategy. On a large whiteboard, a chart showed the airline's current stock prices. It was going down, slowly, quietly, but it was going down. James stood in front of the team. We now own 31% of the company, he said. We need 20% more to take control. His chief strategist looked concerned. If they find out it's you behind this, they'll fight back. James smiled. Then we stay invisible. They were using small holding companies, one in Florida, one in Canada, one offshore. It was legal. It was smart. No one would connect the dots. Not yet. While James and his team made quiet moves, The airline's board of directors had problems of their own. Profits were down. Customer complaints were rising. Their CDO, Mr. Douglas, was under pressure. In a private board meeting, he raised his voice. "We need to cut costs. Fire more ground staff if we have to." A female board member spoke up. "Customers are angry because of poor service, not because of costs." But Douglas didn't listen. He was too proud, too blind, too late. Back in James's office, the team watched security footage. Mark pressed play. The screen showed the day James was stopped at the boarding gate. The video had leaked, not to the public, but into the hands of James's private investigators. In the video, James was calm, respectful. The staff member was cold, dismissive. The guard stood close, like James was a threat. James watched the clip silently, then turned it off. "No one should be treated like this," he said. "Not ever again." Mark nodded. "Sir, you've already changed so much. You've proven your point." James shook his head. "Not yet." He looked out of the window. "I don't want to destroy them. I want to rebuild them." 2 weeks later, James held a private dinner with 2 major shareholders from the airline. He didn't reveal who he was yet. He introduced himself as an investor, a visionary, someone who wanted to save the company from collapse. And they listened, because money talks. And James had plenty of it. By the end of the evening, both shareholders agreed to sell their stakes, quietly. The deals were signed. Paperwork was done. James now controlled 51% of the company. He was the new majority owner, without a single headline, without a single fight, without raising his voice. Power had changed hands. And no one in the airline had a clue. The next day, James stood in front of a mirror and adjusted his tie. Today was the day. Mark entered the room, holding a file. "It's done. The board meeting is scheduled for 9 a.m. They think you're coming to discuss investments." James picked up the file and smiled. "Let's surprise them." At 9 o'clock sharp, James walked into the boardroom of the very airline that once refused to let him board a flight. 12 directors sat around the table. Some were smiling, some were pretending. All of them thought they were still in control. James took a seat at the head of the table. One director leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, it's an honor to finally meet you. What brings you here today?" James placed the file on the table. "What brings me here," he said calmly, "is ownership." The room went silent. Another director laughed nervously. "I don't understand." James opened the file and passed it across the table. Inside were the documents that showed it all: share transfers, legal agreements, silent acquisitions. James looked at each of them and said, "I now own 51% of this airline." No one moved. No one spoke. Mr. Douglas stood up slowly. "That's not possible. I would have known." "You didn't," James interrupted, his voice calm. "Because you weren't paying attention. Just like that day at the airport." A few of the board members lowered their eyes. They had seen the leaked footage. James continued, "I'm not here to fire everyone. I'm not here to destroy the company. I'm here to fix it, to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else again." The meeting ended with shock, confusion, and quiet respect. James walked out of the building the same way he entered, confident, calm, and in control. As he stepped into his car, Mark turned to him. "What now?" James looked ahead and said, "Now we tell the world." The world still didn't know. The airline was now owned by James Carter, but the media had no idea. The employees had no idea. The customers? Still flying, still unaware. But all of that was about to change. James sat quietly in his home office that morning. The sun was rising outside, casting golden light through the windows. In front of him was a letter, short, clear, and powerful. Mark entered with a fresh cup of coffee. He placed it on the table, then looked at the letter. "Is that it?" he asked. James nodded. "Yes, it's time." At exactly 10 a.m., the airline's official website changed. Their logo was still the same, but under the news section, a statement appeared. "A new chapter begins. A message from our new owner." People clicked and read, My name is James Carter. Some of you may know me as a businessman. Some of you may not know me at all. But a few months ago, I stood at one of your boarding gates, holding a valid first-class ticket. I was told I couldn't fly. I was told to step aside. I said nothing that day. I caused no scene. Instead, I made a decision. I would return, not as a passenger, but as the owner. Today, I keep that promise. I am now the majority shareholder of this airline. And I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to rebuild, to fix the broken systems, to bring respect back to every gate, every flight, every employee, and every customer. Discrimination ends here. This is a new chapter, and everyone is welcome to fly. The post spread like fire. Within 30 minutes, Twitter, Instagram, and news channels were full of the story. Black CEO buys airline that humiliated him. From passenger to power. James Carter's bold move. He was denied a seat. Now he owns the airline. People were shocked. Some were inspired. Some cried reading the message. Employees of the airline began texting each other. Did you read this? Wait, this is real? This guy owns the company now? Some of them remembered the day he was stopped. Others had seen the security footage. Now they understood. This wasn't just business. This was history. By afternoon, news vans were parked outside James's office. Reporters waited, hoping for a comment. Paparazzi snapped pictures. Cameras flashed. But James remained inside, calm as ever. In the boardroom, Mark looked nervous. Sir, should we say something to the press? James leaned back in his chair. Let them talk. We've already said enough. He turned toward the screen on the wall. A live video feed showed reactions from around the country. A young black boy watched with his mother. Mom, he looks like me. The boy said, eyes wide. A woman in her 60s wiped a tear from her face. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He built power in silence, she whispered. A group of flight attendants cheered in their break room. Finally, someone who understands what respect really means. But not everyone was happy. Inside a luxury home on the other side of the city, the former CEO of the airline, Mr. Douglas, was watching the news in disbelief. He paced the floor, face red with anger. How could this happen? He shouted. His assistant stood silently. He bought the company legally, sir. Bit by bit. We didn't notice until it was too late. Mr. Douglas slammed his fist on the table. He tricked us. No, the assistant said carefully. He outsmarted you. There was no lawsuit to file, no deal to block. James had done everything by the book, with calm, with control, with class. Back at the office, James met with a small team of employees from the airline, people from all departments, pilots, baggage handlers, customer service, and even cleaners. They sat around a table, unsure of what to expect. James entered and smiled. You don't know me. But I know you, he said. They listened carefully. You're the heart of this company, not the executives, not the boardroom. You. A young woman from customer service raised her hand. Are you really going to change things? Yes, James replied. Not just on paper, in real life. That means better training, better treatment, and better respect. For all of you, and for every passenger. The room clapped softly. One baggage handler wiped his eyes. No one ever said that to us before, he whispered. By night, James stood on his rooftop, looking over the city lights once again. Mark walked over and said, You've done something huge, sir. The world is watching. James nodded slowly. Let them watch. But I didn't do this for the cameras. Mark smiled. Then why? James looked out into the night. For the kid who gets judged before he even speaks. For the woman who's ignored because of her accent. For the man who's always told he's not the right fit. He turned to Mark and said, I did it for every person who was ever told to step aside. Now it's their time to rise. Not everyone welcomed the change. Outside, the world was celebrating. Inside, some were planning to push back. James Carter had taken control of the airline quietly, powerfully, and respectfully. But power always brings enemies. And inside those office walls, not everyone wanted to follow his lead. Some of them were scared, some were jealous, and a few were just angry. In a corner office on the 9th floor, 3 former executives sat together. Their voices were low, their faces tense. "This isn't how business works," said Mr. Grant, a senior VP who had been in the company for 18 years. "He humiliated us," said another, "in front of the world." A third man, Mr. Leonard, folded his arms. He took control without firing a shot. Now everyone's treating him like a hero. Grant leaned forward. "We still have influence. We've been here longer than him. We know this system better." Leonard smirked. "So what do we do?" Grant's voice turned cold. "We slow him down. We make him look weak. And when things start to break, we blame him." James didn't know about the secret meeting. Not yet. He was focused on building. That week, he launched Operation Respect, a new employee training program built around kindness, equality, and service. Posters went up in every airport terminal. Every seat, every skin, every story matters. Customers started noticing the difference. Flight attendants smiled more. Gate staff showed patience. Even baggage handlers were offered free lunch and new uniforms. Small things, but powerful things. Meanwhile, resistance began. It started small. A schedule change was ignored. A pilot refused to attend the new training session. A group of senior managers whispered in meetings, doubting James's soft leadership. One of them even leaked a false story to the press. New airline owner faces staff backlash. Insiders say leadership lacks experience. The article was cold and unfair, but it spread fast. James read it alone in his office. Mark rushed in. "Sir, should we release a statement?" James shook his head. "No. But it's false. They're trying to break your image." James looked up. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Let them talk," he said. "I'm not here to prove myself to the bitter. I'm here to protect the hopeful." That night, James called an emergency meeting. Only 20 people were invited. Handpicked. Loyal. Smart. When they arrived, James stood in the center of the room, not at the head of the table. He spoke simply. "Some people inside this company are trying to make me fail. That's fine. I'm not afraid." He paused. "But this isn't about me. It's about what we promised. Dignity. Equality. Better service. Better systems." He looked each person in the eye. "If you believe in this mission, I need your help. Not tomorrow. Now." There was silence. Then, one by one, heads nodded. A young woman stood up. She was a junior manager from HR. "I used to be ignored in meetings," she said, "until you walked in. Now I'm ready to fight for this." Others stood too. A flight attendant who had served for 12 years. A customer service agent who had once been screamed at by passengers, and her own manager. They weren't executives, but they were the heart of the company. James smiled. "Then let's get to work." The next day, change hit harder. 3 senior executives were removed quietly. No press. No noise. Just clean cuts. James promoted from within, young talent, fresh minds, and diverse faces. This sent a message. Loyalty is rewarded. Resistance will be replaced. But the pushback wasn't over. Mr. Grant, the man who had plotted in silence, made one final move. He created a fake report. It claimed James had been misusing company funds for personal gain. He sent it to the Federal Aviation Authority. He leaked it to reporters. The goal? To break James. To ruin his name. The report reached Mark first. He rushed into James's office, panic in his eyes. "Sir, look at this. Someone's accusing you of fraud." James took the papers. He read them slowly. Then, he placed them on the desk and looked at Mark. "Who did it?" "We traced the email. It came from Grant's IP address. The storm had passed. The lies were exposed. The enemies were gone." But James Carter didn't celebrate. He knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Now it was time to fix what was broken. And that would be the hardest part of all. The airline had been falling for years. Late flights. lost baggage, cold customer service, low staff morale. James had bought control, but now he had to build trust from passengers, from employees, from the world. And he had to move fast. At 6:00 a.m., James arrived at the company's training center, not with cameras, not with media. He walked in quietly, wearing a simple black coat, and greeted the security guard with a warm good morning. Inside, over 200 new employees were seated for orientation. They were told the owner might visit one day. No one expected him today, and no one expected him to sit down among them. But James did just that. He sat in the middle row, beside a young man from Atlanta and a single mother from Texas. They looked at him confused. "Are you new here too?" one asked. James smiled. "In a way, yes." When the training started, the speaker introduced him. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "please welcome the new owner of this airline, Mr. James Carter." The room gasped. Some clapped. Some stared. One person dropped their coffee. James stood slowly. "I came here today," he began, "not to speak above you, but to sit beside you." He looked at the crowd. "I sat in your seat once. Not literally, but I've been doubted, ignored, looked down on." He paused. "And now, I own the very gate that told me you don't belong." Silence filled the room. "But I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to build something that lasts, something better." Then he made a promise. "From this day forward, this company will be built on two things: respect and excellence. You don't need a title to be important here. You only need heart." The room stood and clapped. For the first time in years, hope was in the air. Over the next 6 weeks, James made bold changes. First, he improved working conditions. Flight attendants were given more rest between flights. Baggage staff received bonuses. Customer service reps were no longer timed like machines. They were trained like professionals. Second, he invested in customer care. Every complaint now received a personal response. Free upgrades were offered to frequent passengers with bad past experiences. A new hotline was created, not for complaints, but for appreciation, and thousands of people called. My flight was delayed, but the staff was kind. The pilot personally apologized. That never happened before. Something's different, and I like it. But James didn't stop there. He launched a campaign, Fly Forward. It wasn't just about flying. It was about moving forward, past the pain, the racism, the disrespect, the silence. Commercials showed real employees: a mechanic from Detroit, a check-in agent from Houston, a wheelchair assistant who had worked for 20 years without being seen. They were now the face of the company. Not models, not actors. Real people. Real stories. And the results? They were shocking. In just 3 months, customer satisfaction rose by 41%. Employee resignations dropped by 60%. Social media praise doubled. Flight delays decreased by 22%. Investors were stunned. One CEO of a rival airline said on TV, "What James Carter has done in 3 months, most can't do in 3 years." News anchors praised him. But James kept quiet. He didn't want praise. He wanted purpose. One night, Mark walked into James's office holding a printed email. "Sir," he said, "you should read this." It was from an old passenger, a woman in her 70s. She had been on the same flight the day James was denied boarding. Her message read, "Dear Mr. Carter, that day at the gate, I stood behind you. I saw how they treated you. I was too scared to say anything. I went home ashamed of my silence. But today, I saw your commercial, and I cried. Thank you for not shouting. Thank you for rising. Thank you for showing the world what dignity looks like." James read the letter twice. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the sky. He didn't say a word, but a small tear rolled down his cheek. That weekend, James flew for the first time since buying the airline. He boarded quietly, no VIP treatment. As he entered the plane, the gate agent smiled and said, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter." He smiled back. "Thank you. It's good to be back." The flight crew stood straighter. The passengers nodded respectfully. And as the plane lifted into the clouds, James leaned back in his seat. The same seat he was once denied, and he whispered to himself, "We're flying forward now." The sky was calm, and so was James Carter. He stood by the large glass window of the airport's VIP lounge, watching one of his planes take off into the evening sky. But this wasn't just a plane. It was his dream flying. It had been 1 year since he became the owner of the airline. 1 year since he turned pain into purpose. 1 year since the world watched him rise. Now the question wasn't, can he lead? The question was, what comes next? James didn't want to just be remembered as the man who bought the airline that rejected him. He wanted something more, a legacy. So he made one final move. 3 months later, James announced a press conference. No one knew what to expect. Reporters, influencers, and airline staff filled the hall. Cameras were ready, microphones in place. At exactly 10 o'clock a.m., James walked onto the stage, dressed in a plain black suit. No flash, no noise, just quiet strength. He looked at the crowd and said, "I didn't come here today to talk about profits. I came here to talk about purpose." He held up a document. "This is the future of this airline." People leaned forward. James continued, "Today, I officially sign over 25% of this company's shares to a new trust fund, the Wings of Change Foundation. This foundation will be used to fund scholarships for young people of color who dream of working in aviation, support training for employees from underrepresented communities, help families who are unfairly treated by any travel company. No one should be told, 'You don't belong.' Not at an airport, not on a plane, not anywhere. We are not just flying people. We are lifting stories. We are flying justice." The room was silent. Then it exploded in applause. Some stood, some cried. A reporter in the front whispered, This is history." Later that week, a special flight took off from New York to Los Angeles. Flight number, JC001. Aircraft name, the Phoenix. It was the first plane painted in new company colors, deep blue, gold, and silver wings. And on the side of the aircraft, written in bold letters, "You belong here." Inside the flight were 150 hand-picked passengers, former employees who had retired in silence, students who had won scholarships from the new foundation, flight crew who had served for over 20 years without ever being noticed, and in seat 1A, James Carter. The plane took off slowly, rising above the clouds. There was no media on board, just stories, just peace. Meanwhile, a young boy sat at home watching the news with his father. The boy asked, "Dad, who is James Carter?" The father smiled. "He's the man who changed how we fly, not just through the sky, but through respect." Back at headquarters, something new was placed in the lobby. It was a large photo frame. Inside was the original boarding pass that James had tried to use the day he was blocked. Next to it, a short note in gold letters. "They said no. I said not yet. James Carter." It became a symbol. New employees took pictures with it. Parents brought their children to see it. Pilots saluted it when they walked by. One evening, James visited the airport alone. No team, no camera, just himself. He stood at the same gate where everything started. He saw a young employee standing at the desk, nervous, maybe new. James walked up slowly. "First week?" he asked. The boy nodded. "Yes, sir." James smiled. "You're doing great." The boy looked up. "Thank you. Wait, you're Mr. Carter, right?" James nodded. The boy's face lit up. "Sir, I just want to say, you changed everything for us." James shook his hand. "You're the future now. Don't forget that." The next morning, James walked into his office and sat at his desk. Mark entered with fresh coffee, as always. He placed it down and smiled. "You've built something beautiful." James looked outside the window. "Do you think it'll last?" he asked. Mark nodded. "You didn't build it with fear. You built it with love. And that kind of thing, it flies forever." James looked down at a piece of paper he had kept in his desk for a long time. It was the complaint report filed against him the day he was denied boarding. He folded it, placed it in a box marked Past, and locked it away. Then he opened a new folder on his desk. It was titled, Next. A final message was released to the public 1 week later. It was a video, just James, just words. This journey started with silence. I didn't shout at the gate. I didn't fight with fists. I walked away. But I didn't forget. I turned pain into purpose. And now, as our planes fly across the world, I want every person, of every race, class, and background, to know. You are seen. You are heard. You are welcome. The sky is big enough for all of us. And just like that, a man who was once denied a seat gave thousands of people wings.